There is a version of you that knows exactly what it should be doing. It knows the work it should be building, the discipline it should be holding, the life it is capable of constructing. It knows all of this with a clarity that surfaces at odd hours, at 2 a.m., in the shower on a long drive when the noise finally stops, and then the moment passes, and you return to waiting. You scroll. You delay. You tell yourself you will begin when the timing is right, when the energy arrives, when you feel ready. The feeling never comes on schedule. You know this, and still you wait. This is not laziness. What you are experiencing is something older and deeper than laziness. Most men are not waiting for motivation. They are waiting for permission. Permission from a feeling. The surge, the rush, the moment the music swells and the path forward becomes obvious. They have mistaken motivation for something it has never been. Motivation is not a feeling. It is not a mood that visits you when conditions are ideal. It is a capacity, the same way strength is a capacity. You do not wait to feel strong before you lift. You lift and strength follows. Motivation works the same way, and almost no one tells you this. The men who built the most, endured the most, created the most, they did not wait for the surge. They worked before it came. They worked when it was absent. They had found something most men search for their entire lives without knowing what to call it. They had found their reason. In 1942, Viktor Frankl, a Viennese psychiatrist, 40 years old, at the peak of his career, was arrested by the Nazis and transported to the concentration camps. Over the next 3 years, he passed through Auschwitz, Dachau, and 2 other camps. His wife, his parents, and his brother were killed. He had nothing. What he had was a question he could not stop turning over in his mind. Why do some men survive and others do not? He watched, he observed, and what he found was not what he expected. The men who survived longest were not always the strongest physically. They were the men who had a reason to survive, a manuscript they needed to finish, a child they needed to return to, a truth they needed to tell the world. The men who lost their reason, who could no longer answer the question of why, deteriorated far faster than their physical condition alone explained. Frankl survived, and after liberation, he sat down and wrote what he had witnessed down a single night, dictating continuously to keep himself from stopping. The result was Man's Search for Meaning, one of the most important books written in the 20th century. It has sold over 16 million copies. His central argument was this: motivation without meaning is borrowed energy. It runs out. But a man who has connected his work to something larger than his daily comfort has access to a different fuel entirely. That fuel does not deplete under pressure. It deepens under pressure, he quoted Nietzsche. He who has a why can endure any how. Frankl did not just quote it. He lived it in the hardest possible laboratory. In 1930, Winston Churchill was 55 years old and considered politically finished. He had held some of the highest offices in Britain: First Lord of the Admiralty, Secretary of State for War, Chancellor of the Exchequer, and had been removed from or abandoned each of them amid controversy. He was in debt. He was out of power. His own party had turned against him. The newspapers called him erratic, unreliable, a man of the past. He spent the next decade in what historians call his wilderness years, out of government, largely ignored, writing books and articles to pay his bills. During this time, he delivered speech after speech in Parliament, warning about Hitler and the rising threat of Nazi Germany. Almost no one listened. He was mocked. He was told he was seeing ghosts, manufacturing crises, living in the past. He continued anyway. What kept Churchill working during a decade of irrelevance was not optimism. He was not an optimist by temperament. What kept him going was conviction, a belief so deeply rooted in his understanding of history and human nature that it did not require external validation to sustain itself. He was not motivated by applause. He was driven by certainty about what was coming and what needed to be said. When 1940 arrived and Britain stood alone against Germany, Churchill was ready. The voice that had been speaking into an empty room for 10 years suddenly had the entire world listening. He had not become a different man overnight. He had simply been the same man all along, the one who did not stop when the audience disappeared. If meaning sustains and conviction carries, what destroys motivation? Three things consistently across every man who has lost it. The first is comparison. The moment you begin measuring your progress against someone else's visible results, you have handed control of your internal state to an external variable you cannot influence. Other people's highlight reels are not data, they are noise. And you cannot stay tuned to your own frequency while listening to everyone else's. The second is comfort. Motivation does not survive in ease. It requires friction, resistance, something pushing back. The man who has arranged his life to be as frictionless as possible has removed the very conditions under which drive deepens and sharpens. Comfort is not the reward for hard work. It is the slow erosion of the capacity for it. The third is the absence of a real reason. Not a goal, a reason. Goals are destinations. Reasons are fuel. A man with a goal but no reason will abandon the goal the moment the cost becomes real. A man with a reason will find a new path when the first one closes. Most men have goals. Almost none of them have sat down and answered the question behind the goal. Why does this actually matter to you? Not to your parents, not to the version of yourself you perform online. To you alone, in the quiet where no one is watching. This is not about discipline, hacks, or morning routines. It is about building the internal architecture that makes sustained effort possible. First, find your reason before you find your method. Sit alone with this question. Why does this work matter to me? Write the answer in one sentence. If you cannot, you do not have a reason yet. Do not begin building until you do. A building with no foundation is just a pile of materials. Second, act before the feeling. Choose one thing today, one concrete action toward the work that matters. Do it before you feel motivated. Do it in the absence of the surge. Do it as an act of will rather than emotion. The feeling follows action. It has always followed action. It never precedes it. Third, remove comparison completely. For 30 days, stop measuring yourself against anyone else. Work, your pace, your progress, evaluated only against where you were yesterday. Most men discover in this period that they were far closer to their reason than they realized. The noise of comparison had made the distance appear larger than it was. Fourth, find your resistance and stay in it. Frankl's reason held in a concentration camp. Churchill's conviction held through a decade of being ignored. Your reason must be tested in difficulty to reveal whether it is real. Seek the friction deliberately. It is not your obstacle. It is your laboratory. There is a version of you that knows exactly what it should be doing. That version is not waiting for a feeling. It is not waiting for the right moment, the right conditions, the right surge of energy. It has a reason, and it understands that the reason is enough. Frankl found his in the darkest place a human being can be placed. Churchill found his in a decade when no one was listening. Yours is already there. It has always been there. The only question is whether you will be quiet enough and still enough to hear it.